You may not have heard of Leopold von Sacher-Masoch, but you probably have heard of what was named after him, Masochism. The term Masochismus was coined in 1890 by pioneer sexologist and psychiatrist Richard von Krafft-Ebing in his book Psychopathia Sexualis, or Sexual Psychopathy, a Clinical Forensic Study. He defined it as a sexual perversion in which the individual affected is controlled by the idea of being completely and unconditionally subject to the will of a person of the opposite sex in sexual feeling and thought, of being treated by this person as by a master, humiliated and abused. I'm Professor Graham Yorston, and today I'm going to be exploring the world of Sacher-Masoch to find out a little more about the man, his writings, and his not so private life. He was born in 1836 in the city of Lviv in Ukraine, close to the modern border with Poland, which at the time was called Lemberg, the capital of the Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria, a province of the Austrian Empire, not to be confused with the Galicia of northern Spain. They are proud of him there and have erected a statue to commemorate him. His father was a commissioner in the Austrian Imperial Police Force, his mother a Ukrainian noblewoman. He studied philosophy, law and history at Prague and Graz universities and was a lecturer in Graz for several years before becoming a full-time writer. He wrote prolifically about the history, folklore and culture of his homeland and its complex mix of ethnicities, and his colourful short stories and novels soon became more popular than his non-fiction. At this time, the Pan-Slavist movement promoting the cultural identity and unity of all the Slavic peoples was becoming increasingly vocal, especially amongst the South Slavs of the Austrian Empire, and Sacher-Masoch's stories fed into this desire for self-determination. As a boy, he had witnessed the failed Krakow uprising of 1846 and its aftermath, the Galician slaughter, when peasants were encouraged to murder and loot the pro-Polish landowners by their Austrian overlords. His father is said to have distinguished himself with a heavy hand in the uprisings, and when there was another rebellion in Prague in 1848, he was appointed governor to ensure that this too was ended swiftly and brutally. The 12-year-old Leopold said that he saw the insurgents arrive, some dead and some wounded, on a dull February day, escorted by armed peasants lying on miserable little wagons, the blood running down the straw with the dogs licking it. Seeing all of this firsthand may have contributed to Sacher-Masoch developing his view of the world as a harsh, unforgiving place in which everyone, rich and poor alike, was in a Darwinian struggle for survival. In 1869, he started a vast cycle of novels under the collective title The Legacy of Cain, a grandiose project if ever there was one. He intended it to form a natural history of humanity in all its corruption and misery. He originally envisaged 6 parts: love, property, money, the state, war, and death, each made up of several short novels. The cycle opened with love. The prologue for this includes a story of a hunter in a dark forest who meets a stranic or wandering mystic who gives his withering verdict on mankind. So, are human beings in your opinion nothing but beasts? The hunter asks. Of course, the most reasonable, bloodthirsty and cruel of beasts. No other is as inventive in stealing from and enslaving its brother. And so, wherever you look, in human life as well as in nature, the struggle for existence, for life, is at the cost of others. Murder, thievery, deceit, slavery. Man, a slave of woman. Parents of their children, the poor of the rich, the citizens of the state. The second volume, Property, which followed in 1877, continues his world-weary theme of possession as a decidedly negative force, always seeing it in its baser aspects of greed, fraud, and deception. Although the cycle was never completed, he did finish some of the stories which were to be included in the later volumes, and they too set out his bleak, uncompromising view of life, reflecting the philosophy of Arthur Schopenhauer, then very fashionable in German artistic circles. He was not all doom and gloom, however. he wrote to his brother of his hopes that the continent would one day progress from the wretchedness of absolute monarchy to be rescued through democracy into a United States of Europe. Well, who would have thought that the European Union was an idea from the mind of the man who invented Masochism? But although there have been valiant efforts to make a case for Sacher-Masoch being an important social historian and champion of the oppressed minorities of Central Europe, it is for his erotic writings that he is best known today. The most famous of these is Venus in Furs. It is available as a free download in English and German from Project Gutenberg, and at around 100 pages it doesn't take long to read. It has inspired a stage play by David Ives, and at least 7 different films, from this rather salacious-looking Italian version from 1969
Don't touch me! Each morbid scene of
to Roman Polanski's 2013 film, for which he won a Best Director César Award. Venus in Furs is also famous, however, as the inspiration for the highly influential Velvet Underground song with its unforgettable first line.
Shiny, shiny, shiny boots of leather.
Right from the outset, Venus in Furs sets out Sacher-Masoch's fetishistic fascination with powerful women swathed in furs, brandishing whips. I haven't read his other books, but by all accounts this image is repeated in many of his other writings. And repeated, and repeated, and repeated. It even appeared on his stationery, for goodness sake. The hero, or anti-hero, Severin, is in love with a woman whom he implores to treat him cruelly, which despite her initial reluctance, she does with increasing intensity throughout the book. The blows fell rapidly and powerfully on my back and arms, each one cut into my flesh and burned there, but the pains enraptured me. They came from her whom I adored, and for whom I was ready at any hour to lay down my life. I have to say that if you read Venus in Furs hoping for a little bit of 19th century naughtiness, you may be disappointed. It reads more like a philosophical justification for men wishing to be dominated than titillation. It's about as erotic as a textbook of geometry. The most interesting part for me was the surprisingly modern debate between a man and the goddess Venus in the dream sequence at the beginning. Can there be any greater cruelty for a lover than the unfaithfulness of the woman he loves? The man asks. Indeed, she replied, we are faithful as long as we love, but you demand faithfulness of a woman without love, and the giving of herself without enjoyment. Who is cruel there, woman or man? You of the North in general take love too soberly and seriously. You talk of duties where there should only be a question of pleasure. There are lots of scholarly articles analysing Sacher-Masoch's writing from feminist, psychoanalytic and historical perspectives, suggesting that Venus in Furs is really about women's rights, the class struggle, or even the fight against anti-Semitism. But I'm not convinced. It just seems to me that he is writing about his favourite subject, being whipped by women dressed up in fur coats. But where did his lust for the whip and cruel, domineering women come from? As a child, he was beaten by an aunt who liked to wrap herself in heavy furs after he secretly watched her in an adulterous affair. He wrote, "Although I writhed under the cruel blows of the beautiful woman, I have to admit that I felt a certain pleasure in doing it. This event was burned into my soul like a red-hot iron." At a young age, he also discovered and enjoyed the works of Enlightenment philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, especially his tales of being spanked. In his private life, he played out his fantasies, and after a long affair with a doctor's wife, he met an aspiring writer, Fanny Pistor-Bogdanov, at the age of 33, with whom he signed a contract, making him her slave for 6 months, with the stipulation that the Baroness should wear furs as often as possible, especially when in a cruel mood. His humiliating experiences and travels with her form the basis for Venus in Furs, but, as in the book, it didn't last. At 37, he married Angelica Aurora Rumelin, who, judging by her photographs, seemed to quite enjoy dressing up in furs. She was also a writer and adopted the pseudonym Wanda after the dominatrix in Venus. They had 3 children together, but their relationship was difficult and burdened by frequent moves. In 1881, he founded an arts magazine in Leipzig, but it folded after 2 years, and he was held liable for the huge debts run up by the co-editor, who also happened to be his wife's lover, and he was financially ruined. They eventually divorced, but after his death she published an autobiography, Confessions of My Life, in which she depicts herself as the unwilling participant in her husband's fetishistic sexual experimentation. At the time, it was viciously attacked as a poisonous fabrication of pathological lies, but more recently it has been accepted as an important source of information on Sacher-Masoch and the sexual politics of fin de siècle Europe, although probably not one that should be taken too literally. After a long stay in Paris, Sacher-Masoch was awarded the Légion d'honneur, France's most prestigious honour, and there is no doubt that he was held in the highest regard by French literati. He then settled down in a more tranquil second marriage with his literary assistant Hulda Meister in Lindheim near Frankfurt. He was in decline at this point, possibly as a result of neurosyphilis. There is much about his life that is uncertain, even the date of his death. Most biographers say he died in 1895, but one suggests that he was hospitalised in an insane asylum and died a year later at the age of 60, and the earlier date was simply a smokescreen to cover the shame of insanity. But what about the man who made Sacher-Masoch famous? Richard von Krafft-Ebing. His pioneering book on sexuality and sexual deviance is often criticised for its moralistic tone and its pathologising of practices which would nowadays be regarded, in most countries, as part of the normal diversity of human sexuality. He believed that the purpose of sexual desire was procreation, and that any form of recreational sex was a perversion of the sex drive. As a result of this central belief, many of the sexual practices he describes he refers to as perversions, anomalies, or disgusting acts. Detailed case histories make up the greater part of the book, and in these he describes the whole variety of sexual experience in a matter-of-fact way that actually comes across as rather modern and non-judgmental, despite his extensive use of Latin, which he employed to discourage lay readers from dwelling too long in the pages of his magnum opus. His section on Masochism amounts to 83 of the 617 pages of the English translation of his 12th and final edition, published in 1902. In this he describes 36 cases of masochism before attempting to explain the behaviour. The cases are as fascinating today as they would have been over a century ago, but Krafft-Ebing's theorising about the supposed causes very much reflects the prevailing views of degeneracy as the root of all insanity. And as you can see, his section on masochism in women wouldn't win him any prizes for wokeism. In women, voluntary subjugation to the opposite sex is a physiological phenomenon. Owing to her passive role in procreation and long-existent social conditions, ideas of subjection are in women normally connected with the idea of sexual relations. They form, so to speak, the harmonics which determine the tone quality of feminine feeling. Poor old Leopold himself, an Austrian nobleman after all, wasn't too happy with the honour of having a perversion named after him. But Krafft-Ebing explained why he used his name. I feel justified in calling this sexual anomaly masochism because the author, Sacher-Masoch, frequently made this perversion, which up to his time was quite unknown to the scientific world, the foundation of his writings. Sacher-Masoch was not only the poet of masochism, but he himself was afflicted with the anomaly. During his lifetime, Sacher-Masoch was a well-known and highly respected man of letters. He was a free thinker who espoused socialist and humanist ideas in his fiction and non-fiction. And he was a fierce defender of oppressed minority at a time when standing up for Jews and Slavs was not fashionable. Most of his works remain untranslated into English, so it is difficult to judge their merit. But it does seem a little unfair that he is known today only as the poet of masochism. Perhaps it is time to recognise his other work and celebrate him as an early champion of diversity in all its forms. Thank you for watching. Please ask questions or leave comments. And if you want to be kept up to date with all the latest videos, please subscribe and click the notifications bell. See you again soon.